You were in a meeting. Someone raised their voice over yours, cut off your idea mid-sentence, and presented it as their own. Everyone nodded. Everyone laughed. And you sat there in silence, feeling that familiar burn in your chest that you never quite knew how to name. It was not anger, exactly. It was something older and deeper than anger. It was the slow, suffocating realization that being a good person was costing you something real, something measurable, and that you were the only one in the room who had not yet figured out what the price tag said. You help when people ask, sometimes before they ask. You avoid conflict because you do not want to hurt anyone. You give ground, step back, smile when you should speak, listen when you should push, and somewhere underneath all of that, a part of you has started to suspect that there is an unwritten law operating in this world, a law no one ever taught you, but that every predator seems to have been born knowing. And that law says this: kindness without power is just vulnerability wearing a prettier name. That suspicion bothers you. It contradicts everything you were raised to believe about what it means to be a decent human being. But it does not go away, because somewhere underneath the discomfort, you know it is true. And today, we are going to name it properly. We are going to trace it all the way back to a man who saw this mechanism with brutal clarity 4 centuries ago and wrote it down in a book that still makes people deeply uncomfortable because it refuses to lie to us about what we actually are. That suspicion of yours is not paranoia, it is diagnosis. And it has a name, it has data, and it has a history that began long before you were born. The University of Notre Dame conducted one of the most unsettling studies ever published on this subject, releasing their findings in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology. What they found was this: men who score high on agreeableness, those classified as warm, cooperative, trusting, and kind, earn on average 18% less than their less agreeable peers. 18%. Same job title, same educational background, same company, same demonstrated competence. Researcher Timothy Judge summarized their findings with a line that should be printed on every motivational poster ever made. Nice guys are getting the shaft. And in 2020, a follow-up study published by the American Psychological Association, conducted by Sandra Matz and Joe Gladstone, went even further. It showed that agreeable people do not just earn less money. They accumulate significantly more financial hardship over the course of their entire lives, not because they are less intelligent, but because they consistently assign less importance to money, negotiate less assertively, and yield in situations where they should hold firm. Kindness without structure, without strategy, and without limits does not lift the person who practices it. It broadcasts availability to everyone who wants to exploit it. Thomas Hobbes knew this. He did not use this language because he was writing in the 17th century, but what he observed at the foundation of human nature was precisely this mechanism at work, silent, relentless, and operating inside every power dynamic that human beings enact with one another. Hobbes was born in 1588 in an England shaking with decades of religious warfare, violent disputes over the throne, and social chaos so common it had become normalized. There is a revealing anecdote about his birth itself. His mother reportedly went into premature labor upon hearing that the Spanish Armada was approaching England's coast. Hobbes used to say, with a bitter edge of irony, that he was born as a twin, with fear. That was not a literary flourish. It was autobiography. When the English Civil War erupted between 1642 and 1651, pitting King Charles I against Parliament and turning city streets into battlefields, Hobbes did not simply observe from a comfortable distance. He lived it in his body, his mind, and his philosophy. He voluntarily exiled himself to France in 1642 to escape those who already found his ideas dangerously honest. He watched order dissolve. He witnessed what happens when people stop being afraid of consequences, and what he saw haunted him for the rest of his life, not because it was monstrous, but because it was true. In 1651, he published Leviathan, a work that many scholars still call the most important book in the history of Western political philosophy, and in it he wrote something that civilized society has never fully had the courage to absorb. In the state of nature, without a structure of power-imposing limits, human life is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. That was not a metaphor. It was a clinical observation about what human beings do when the restraints come off, and every individual is finally free to act on their deepest impulses without consequence. For Hobbes, the state of nature was not a golden age buried in the distant past. It was the latent condition that exists beneath every civilization, like magma beneath the Earth's crust, always present, always waiting for the right crack to come through. When pressure increases, when institutions weaken, when the fear of consequences disappears, what surfaces is not instinctive goodness. What surfaces is the war of all against all, what he named in Latin the bellum omnium contra omnes, the condition in which every human being is simultaneously predator and prey to every other human being around them. And in that state, according to Hobbes, there is no just or unjust, no good or evil, no virtue or vice. There is only what works for survival and what does not. Kindness in that environment is not virtue. It is a signal of weakness. And signals of weakness attract predators with an efficiency that no self-help book will ever teach you to avoid, because most self-help books were written specifically to sell you the comforting fantasy that the world rewards niceness. Have you ever stopped to count how many times in your own life you were the one who gave ground because you wanted to be a good person and ended up being the one who walked away with less? Not great tragedies. The small, repeating patterns that hollow someone out slowly while everyone around them is busy not noticing. The friend who always calls when they need something and disappears when you do. The coworker who absorbs your ideas for months and presents them as their own in the meeting that matters. The family member who treats your generosity as a renewable resource and calls it love. The partner who mistakes your patience for permanent consent. These patterns are not accidents or unfortunate coincidences. They are Hobbes's state of nature, operating inside the civilized structures we call friendship, career, family, and love. Civilization built the rules. It did not eliminate the predators. It just taught some of them to wear a better suit. If you have ever felt that being a good person put you at a serious disadvantage in your own life, write in the comments right now. I learned that kindness without limits is an open invitation to be used. You are not alone in that realization. There are people watching this right now who have lived exactly what you have lived, and seeing that comment might be the first time someone outside their own head names what they have been carrying for years. Every comment in this channel is evidence that there is a community of people who are not afraid to look at reality even when it is uncomfortable. If this video is landing for you, hit like right now, because that signal is what gets this content in front of the people who need it most. The research from the University of British Columbia revealed something even more disturbing about this particular dynamic between kindness and exploitation. People with Machiavellian, narcissistic, and psychopathic personality traits, the constellation that psychologists call the dark triad, are precisely the individuals most likely to present themselves to the world as virtuous victims. They learn early that performing vulnerability and apparent generosity is a more effective tool of social capture than any form of open aggression. Researcher Robert Hare, one of the world's foremost experts on psychopathy, described this category of person as social predators who are continuously seeking a source of supply and who, wherever they find power, status, or financial opportunity, know exactly how to extract it with the precision of someone who has been practicing that particular skill their entire life. And where do they find the easiest access? In kind people. In people who genuinely believe the best of others. in people who cannot imagine that someone would deliberately weaponize their generosity against them. Hobbes would have called that strategic naivety. It is not a moral failing on your part. It is simply not understanding the rules of the game being played all around you by people who either were born knowing those rules or learned them long before you had a chance to realize the game existed. Machiavelli, a figure whose thinking about the raw mechanics of power runs in direct conversation with Hobbes, wrote something that cuts to the same bone. In The Prince, he stated plainly that whoever wants to practice goodness in all things will come to ruin among so many who are not good. That was not a recommendation to become cruel or dishonest. It was a map of the actual territory, a direct warning, stripped of decoration, that in the world as it is, not as we wish it were, kindness without strategic awareness is a posture of permanent exposure. Hobbes would have agreed with that diagnosis entirely. For him, human reason exists specifically to perceive that danger and respond to it with intelligence rather than sentiment. The exit from the state of nature is not spontaneous, unreflective goodness. It is the rational calculation that structured cooperation, with clear terms, genuine reciprocity, and real consequences for whoever breaks the agreement, produces better outcomes for everyone than permanent warfare or submission disguised as generosity. But here is the knot that almost no one untangles, the deepest layer of what Hobbes was actually saying when he built his entire philosophy of politics. The social contract he proposed, the agreement by which human beings surrender a portion of their individual freedom to a sovereign authority in exchange for protection and order, is not only a political theory about how states come to exist, it is a precise and applicable metaphor for every human relationship you have ever entered. When you take a job, start a friendship, commit to a romantic partnership, or enter a business arrangement, you are making an implicit contract. You are offering something of value and expecting something of value in return. The structural problem is that kind people tend to keep honoring their side of that contract long after the other party has already broken theirs. They keep giving when the other side has stopped giving. They keep yielding when they should be demanding. They keep protecting the relationship while the other party is using it as a resource to be depleted. And they do this because they were taught from an early age that being good means never keeping score, never measuring what you received against what you gave, never attaching conditions to the love you offer. Hobbes would say that is not kindness. That is the abdication of reason. It is renouncing your own survival instinct and calling it virtue to feel better about the sacrifice you are continuously making. What modern social psychology has discovered about this specific behavioral pattern is disturbing in its clarity and consistency. Extensive research shows that people who score high on agreeableness, the dimension within the Big Five personality framework that measures kindness, cooperativeness, and the genuine desire to please, show significantly greater difficulty saying no, negotiating assertively, holding firm boundaries over time, and detecting when they are being systematically manipulated. This is not accidental, and it is not a personal character weakness. It is a direct consequence of how the underlying system operates. The same neural architecture that generates genuine empathy and cooperative instinct also creates blind spots for deliberate exploitation. Highly kind people tend to project their own intentions onto others, assuming that what they are receiving from a relationship is proportional to what they are putting in. And when they finally realize the exchange has been radically imbalanced for an extended period, the most common response is not anger. It is existential confusion. How could someone do this to me? Hobbes's answer would be simple, direct, and free of any romanticism, because they could, because you allowed it, because in the state of nature that never fully went away, that continues operating inside every social structure we have built around ourselves, whoever does not defend what is theirs learns the hard way that no one is going to defend it for them. This brings us to one of the most important distinctions Hobbes ever drew, and one that is rarely explained with the clarity the subject demands. He was not saying that human beings are evil by nature in the traditional moral sense, the sense that implies deliberate, conscious malice. He was saying that human beings are driven by passions that precede any morality, by desires for power, recognition, security, pleasure, and advantage over others, and that without an external structure to discipline those passions, conflict is the inevitable result, because each individual will pursue the maximum for themselves without genuine concern for the cost to anyone else. Kindness without structure does not eliminate that conflict. It simply shifts who pays the price for it. And in the majority of cases, the one who pays the highest price is exactly the kind person who believed their generosity would be recognized, matched, and respected by everyone around them, because that is what they would do if the roles were reversed. That era of projection is the heart of everything Hobbes was trying to warn us about, 4 centuries before the research existed to confirm it empirically. There is a pattern documented extensively in organizational psychology that confirms all of this with verifiable, replicated data. Highly agreeable people are significantly less likely to emerge as leaders, even when they are demonstrably more competent than their less agreeable peers. Timothy Judge, in his landmark meta-analysis on leadership and personality, found that agreeableness is positively related to leadership effectiveness once someone already holds the position, but negatively related to the likelihood of actually becoming a leader in the first place. In other words, kind people make better leaders in practice, but less kind people are far more likely to become leaders at all. The world does not automatically reward kindness with power. It far more frequently rewards kindness with responsibility without authority, with invisible labor that receives no recognition, with loyalty that is never returned, with dedication that is read as obligation by everyone around the person performing it. And Hobbes, by building his entire philosophy on an honest acknowledgement of that reality, was not asking us to become worse people. He was asking us to become more lucid about the field we are actually operating on, rather than the field we were told to believe in. If you have made it this far into this video and you are feeling something being named inside you that has never had a proper name before, know that this channel was built for exactly that moment. For the people who have always sensed that the world runs on a logic that no one openly teaches in school or at home, and who have started to understand that kindness without awareness and without limits might be the most expensive thing they are carrying without realizing it. Here, human nature is examined without filters, without the convenient sentimentality of people who prefer comforting stories to uncomfortable truths. If you want to genuinely understand how power actually works in the daily dynamics of relationships and institutions, how to protect what is yours without losing who you are in the process, and how to use the same rational intelligence that Hobbes recognized as the defining capacity of every thinking human being to navigate a world that does not always play by the rules you were taught, subscribe to this channel. Each video was built to go one level deeper than the one before it, because the questions worth asking rarely have shallow answers. This is not a channel for people who want confirmation of what they already think. It is a channel for people who are ready for the questions that change everything. Click the bell so you do not miss anything, because this kind of content does not show up in the feed of someone who is not already looking for it. What Hobbes left us was not a verdict of condemnation on the human species. It was a mirror. And mirrors, however uncomfortable they are to look into, possess a power that comfort never will. They show us what is actually there. You can still be kind. You can still be generous, loyal, and principled. Those are genuine qualities, and they carry real weight in the world, in real relationships, with real people who practice the same things you do. But now you know that kindness, without strategic consciousness, is not complete virtue. It is virtue cut in half. It is a beautiful flower planted in ground where anyone can walk through and take what they want without asking. The kindness that protects you, that has firm limits, that knows when to say no without apologizing for it, that recognizes when a contract has been broken and responds accordingly, that is the kindness Hobbes would have respected, not because it is less generous, but because it is more honest about the world it operates in and about the value of the person who practices it. You were not made to be anyone's resource. You were made to be the deliberate architect of your own security, your own choices, and the relationships you consciously decide to sustain. And now that you know that, the world you are looking at will never be quite the same as the world you were looking at before. That is the only transformation that actually matters. There is one more layer to this that Hobbes observed, and that modern neuroscience has begun to confirm in ways that would have fascinated him deeply. The human brain did not evolve to function in the anonymous, large-scale social environments that contemporary civilization has created. It evolved in small tribal groups where reputation was everything, where every exchange was witnessed, and where the cost of exploitation was immediate and social. In those environments, kindness was genuinely adaptive, because defectors were quickly identified and excluded. But in the world we now inhabit, that feedback mechanism has been radically disrupted. We interact daily with hundreds of people whose long-term intentions we cannot read, in institutions large enough that exploitation can be distributed invisibly across many small interactions, and in cultures that actively suppress the expression of boundaries by labeling them as aggression, selfishness, or emotional immaturity. Hobbes would recognize this immediately. The Leviathan was always meant to compensate for exactly this failure of natural social feedback. When the sovereign stops working, when the institutions that were supposed to enforce the terms of the social contract become captured by those with the most to gain from exploiting it, what remains is precisely the state of nature, operating inside the forms of civilization, invisible to the untrained eye, devastatingly visible to anyone who has paid the price for not seeing it sooner. The most practical thing you can take from Hobbes is not pessimism. It is calibration. He was not telling us that all humans are predators. He was telling us that the ratio of predators to cooperators in any given environment shifts dramatically depending on what constraints exist, and that kind people who fail to understand this tend to consistently place themselves in environments and relationships where the constraints are weakest and the predators are most active. The solution is not to become cold or suspicious of everyone. The solution is to become precise, to develop the capacity to distinguish between people who honor the implicit contract of mutual exchange and people who never intended to honor it in the first place. To understand that establishing firm limits is not an act of hostility toward others. It is an act of integrity toward yourself. Hobbes built his entire philosophical structure on one foundational insight, that the person who does not understand the nature of the game they are playing will always be outmaneuvered by the person who does. Understanding the game is not cynicism. It is the prerequisite for choosing to play it on your own terms.